Welcome back, men. Coach, when people think about you, they think of the 3 Super Bowl championships, they think of the NASCAR championship, and some people think that it may be an easy road to find your vocation, what God's created you to do with your skills. Tell us about your journey of going from where you were to where you are now.
Well, actually, my occupational struggle started, I think, when I was in high school, jumped out, went into college at San Diego State, and I had made up my mind in life. I had life figured out. I was going to play pro sports. And it shows you how smart I am, because it was a junior in college when I looked down at this body, and I went, oh my gosh, I could jump about that high, run about that fast. It wasn't going to happen. And so I kind of started saying, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Well, I'd taken physical education as a major, because really I was just trying to stay eligible. And I said, well, you know, I love sports. I'll just go ahead and coach. Walked in, volunteered on the original coaching staff at San Diego State. Don Coryell was head coach, wound up being one of the greatest head coaches ever. And Don said to me, he says, okay, you want to coach? He says, why don't you become John Madden's assistant?
Okay, hold on a second. Okay. So coaching was an afterthought, and you find yourself on the staff of one of the greatest offensive minds in history. And then he says, go help this guy named John Madden. Of course, we all know who John Madden is.
Yeah, John was coaching defense, and so that's how I kind of started coaching. And through one set of circumstances after another, had a job offer. Next was at Florida State, and then went back to Southern Cal, then to Arkansas. So I was kind of all over the place. And all of a sudden, I started picking up this idea that for me, one of the most important things in life, I was an assistant coach. I wanted to be a head coach. Tried a number of different ways to try and become a head coach in college. Frank Broyles, when I was at Arkansas, said, hey, Joe, I'll try and get you a head job if I can. Went to a couple of interviews, didn't get them. Go into pro ball next. And I said, well, maybe that's where I need to be. And then I got to be 35, 36, 37. I said, hey, I'm not going to get to be a head coach.
Okay, so as you're going through this process, what was that struggle like for you? Because most people think that it was probably easy. What was that struggle like?
Well, it was a lot of disappointments. I saw a lot of other coaches that I knew, were friends with. They were getting head coaching opportunities. I wasn't. It was a real struggle for me. And then I think the next big step for me, I got a chance to be the offensive coordinator at Tampa Bay Bucks. And, you know, when you get to be the offensive coordinator, you know, Derwin, you know football, that's your best chance, the next step, to be a head coach. So I go down there. We drafted a young guy named Doug Williams. Kind of everything's set up for me to call the plays. And I said to myself, this is going to be it. You know, I'm going to have a chance to really make my name here. We're going to score a lot of points, and I'm going to get a chance to be a head coach. I had things kind of figured out.
Okay, so where was God in the midst of you pursuing your occupation?
I got to tell you, I'm not so sure I'd spent a lot of time thinking about what God wanted me to do. I was charging through life, and I was kind of saying, well, hey, I kind of fell into this, fell into that. Now when I look back on it, I wasn't falling into it. God was taking me on this journey. Mm-hmm. But I think when, we started that year in Tampa, and I had all these expectations of all the great things that were going to happen, and that year was boom.
So do you think at 36, 37 that you were ready to be a head coach?
When I look back on it now, no. I think God really had his hand on my life. I think as I look back on it, he was kind of taking me through a lot of different circumstances with my occupation, preparing me. And I don't think I was ready. And finished that year in Tampa. It had gone awful. I tell people I could hold out my hand. I shake like a leaf. I mean, it was just an awful experience. And then I had an opportunity to go back and be reunited with Don Coryell, who was coaching the Chargers. And I was caught in this, am I going to go back and take back away from being the offensive coordinator, go back to being just an assistant coach again, backing up my career? Was that the right thing for me to do? A lot of questions, so I made up my mind I was going to do what? I was going to go back, see George Therill, my spiritual father, that little guy in Fayetteville, Arkansas, sit and talk with him and have him try and help me kind of figure out, is this the right thing for me to do? Mm-hmm. Got on a plane, wound up landing in Fort Smith, and it was a snowstorm. And they said, hey, we're canceling the flight to Fayetteville. And the whole time I'm kind of questioning God now. I'm saying, God, what are you doing? I'm just trying to go see my spiritual father. Kind of bummed a ride with a couple of business guys that were going to try and drive.
Joe Gibbs bummed a ride.
Yeah, I walked out front. I had my bags, and these two guys said, I heard them saying we're going to rent a car and stuff, and I said, hey, I'm going with you. I threw my stuff in the back of the car, and I remember these two guys looking at me kind of like, this guy's a nutcase. They got about 2 miles down the road. They're all over the place. They were from Georgia or something. They didn't know how to drive in the snow, and I said, they ain't going to get there. And so I tapped the guy on the shoulder. I said, let me out. And I think they were glad to get rid of me. I took my bags, climbed over the center divider on the freeway, hitchhiked my way back to Fort Smith. Went in there, totally discouraged. Now I'm wet, sitting there and everything, and I'm saying, what, the whole time questioning God. Sat down in that airport. How many times have you seen a Bible in an airport? I looked over, and here was a Bible. I picked it up, and for some reason, in James, that first chapter, it kind of stuck with me about making decisions. I turned to that. Wisdom, I turned to that chapter, and I'm sitting there reading this chapter, and I get a tap on my shoulder from a guy sitting next to me. And he said, I claimed that chapter in my life about 6 months ago. Without me saying a word, I turned to him. He relayed the story that was so close to mine about occupation. And he wanted this job, didn't get it. And he said, I just finally had to turn it over to God. And I stood up, wrote down his phone number, said, thanks so much for that. Ran and jumped on the plane, flying back away from Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I said to myself, sitting on that plane, God's took me to this point. And I said, God, I'm done. I'm through trying to make this happen for myself, trying to be a head coach for myself. I'm just going to trust you. I think that's what was being said to me. I go to the Chargers, became the assistant coach, just coaching the backs. 3 weeks after I was there, the guy's job who I would like to have had got a head coaching job somewhere else. He left. Don Coryell calls me and says, Joe, I want you to be the offensive coach of the quarterbacks here. We go on for the next 2 years, one of the highest scoring offenses in the league.
Well, and I remember that as a little boy, I remember Kellen Winslow and Fouts. And
correct.
It was incredible. And when I listen to your story, I just see the hand of God placing you every step along the way. And so even for men with our occupation, sometimes we want things that are far off, that we miss the blessing that's right in sight.
At the point I turned it over to God, and I said, look, my occupation, what you want me to do, I think, God, I'm putting that in your hands. I want to work as hard as I can to be the best coach I can be, but I'm going to trust the rest of that, to you. And 2 years after I got that job with the Chargers, and we had all that, high explosive offense, I then get the opportunity to be the head coach of the Washington Redskins. So I think kind of what my life shows you there, occupationally, I wanted to be a head coach, but I think God was kind of working in all those different situations, and he was taking me to a point that he was preparing me to be a head coach. I think many times in life we want something, but we may not be ready for it. And so I think, as I look back on my life, a lot of those things I thought were accidents and everything, I now realize that guy tapping me on the shoulder, think about that. What are the odds of that being a random, by chance, something that happened? What, 1 billion to 1?
Maybe.
Yeah, that guy tapping me on the shoulder and saying, I claimed that chapter of my life. I would say, if there's angels, which I believe there are, I think God put that person there, or that was an angel, one way or the other. But that totally changed my whole life and what I wanted to do from an occupation standpoint. And I think I wound up being the head coach of the Washington Redskins, mainly because of those sets of circumstances in my life. And as they say, the rest is history. Coach, that is an amazing journey. You've been able to recruit some incredible all-stars. Oz Guinness is one of them. Let's check out his stats.
deepest purpose comes in answering the call of Jesus. But this isn't just some sort of vague theological or spiritual idea. We follow Jesus, but practically there are some very simple things we need to discover. We need to think through, first of all, what is our giftedness? And then secondly, what are our resources? And thirdly, what are the opportunities in life that we have in front of us? So some people are very practical or good with their hands, or say engineers. My father-in-law built cars for Indianapolis. I couldn't possibly do that. I'm in a different world, more journalism, things like that. Each of us has our gifts. And at the heart of calling, as Jesus gave us in the parable of the talents, the master, the king, gave 1, 2, 5, 10, and then challenged them, left them to multiply and maximize those gifts. So the challenge is to think through, what are my gifts? And you can see, say, with maestros or geniuses, those gifts bubble through very early. I love the story of Yehudi Menuhin, the great violinist. When he was 4, he was fascinated with the first violinist in the San Francisco Symphony. And he was coming from a poor family. He asked his father for a violin. He had no idea violins are rather expensive. And to humor him, his father told a friend, and the friend gave him a toy violin made of metal strings. And Menuhin, when he was 80, and he owned 2 Stradivariuses, very expensive, he said at the age of 4, he knew a metal violin was all wrong. And in front of his father and his father's friends, he smashed it on the ground in half, not realizing how rude that was. But he said, for me, I knew that to play was to be. Now, not many of us are like a Mozart or a Yehudi Menuhin with these incredible gifts that burst through that early. Most of us have a range of gifts. But we've all got to think through what our gifts are, because the heart of calling is our giftedness used to the glory of God and in service of our fellow men. And people are most themselves when they're exercising their calling in terms of their gifts. Now, take the opposite, someone who's got a midlife crisis. Midlife crisis is often someone's chosen a career, it pays well, or their friends are going into it, or their parents want them to do it, but it's not them. And when they hit the midlife crisis, they feel, I'm a square peg in a round hole, or this just isn't me, or I can't see myself doing this the rest of my life. What they're saying is, what I'm doing in my job, my occupation, doesn't fit who I am. And so the key thing is to start, I want to follow the call of God, but I discover that through understanding my giftedness and resources, and then the life opportunities I have, and maximizing those and multiplying those. And that's the key. Ideally, that should happen, say, between 12 and 25. And just as a coach brings out the best, say, in team players, so parents should be affirming and encouraging and drawing out the gifts of kids. And the trouble is today, so many people just choose careers that have no relation to them. So we should think much more practically of following Christ and discovering that giftedness that is really us. The Bible is very realistic. And in describing the fact we live in what's called a fallen world that has been ruined by sin, the plain fact is that not everyone in a fallen world will find a job that fits them. And there's 2 ways that calling has been related to that. On the one hand, calling means that everything we do, regardless of whether it's glorious or fulfilling or not, we still do it to the glory of the Lord. And that's very important. So Paul says the slave in the Roman Empire, he does it to the glory of the Lord, not to his master. The Puritans would say the sweeper of the floor does it. So calling has always been lifting and elevating and giving a dignity even to the menial and the humdrum. But on the other hand, calling also means that while many of us can't find a full-time occupation that exactly fits us, you always have what the Apostle Paul calls tent making. His calling, it's not yours or mine, his calling was to be an apostle to the Gentiles. But he can't go down to the job labor exchange and find $50,000 a year apostle of the Gentiles. So what he does is to make tents. He was good at that. That's his work. It's part of his calling. He probably made his tents to the glory of God, but that gave him the money, the bread, to free him to do what was really him, which was to be an apostle of the Gentiles. There are many examples. I know a very great writer and sociologist, very famous in France. But he said that the heart of his calling was his work among teenage delinquents in Bordeaux. But he did law and these other things just to give him the freedom to do what for him was the heart of it. So all of us can think, what's the heart of our gifts? And sometimes we won't be able to bring that out in our work. My particular calling doesn't quite fit anything. And so my own career has been a little zigzag. Sometimes Christian things, sometimes secular things, but it's been the same calling, whichever of them I was in. It's actually sort of a Puritan phrase that we should live before one audience, the audience of one. If you think of it, a lot of what we do is half in the sight and in the light of audiences. Our family, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors. Writers need readers. Politicians need electorates. Doctors need patients. We all have audiences. But the question is, which audience really shapes us? Now, this is terribly important because we're in a world in America where we're more aware of others. We're what's described as other-directed. You think of teenagers suddenly conscious of their peers. They think they're becoming independent, and they're dressing and listening to the same music as every other teenager. Why? Because they're shaped by their peers, their audience. And you can see in an age of television and of image and these various things, many Americans are what's called other-directed. We're living in the light of others. Now, this has incredible implications. Take, say, ethics. Why do so many top leaders find themselves caught in scandals? Well, simple reason is, in our world, there's more anonymity. Because in a fallen world, morality is close to accountability through visibility. We often do what's right, not just because it's right, but because we're seen. Or we don't do what's wrong, not just because it's wrong, but because we're seen. But what happens when no one sees you? And you think today of either travel. I mean, tomorrow you could be in Bangkok, and you could be doing things no one sees you that you know. And the question is, what do you do there when no one sees you? Or a teenager comes home from high school and plunges in on his or her laptop, and they could be 10 feet from their mom and dad and in some porn site. The question is, what did they do through travel or technology when nobody sees? Now, of course, in the Scriptures, we are who we are when nobody sees except the one audience, the audience of one, the Lord. Now, the Puritans who used that phrase were very practical. So you think today, people working hard, how do we judge success? Money or fame or whatever it is. Puritans said, no, those things are all external. All that matters is living before the one audience, the audience of one. So what is success? Not you've made a pile of money. Not you've got incredible popularity with your friends. No. If at the end of your life God says, well done. Now, one person writing about the Puritans says, the Puritans were as if they'd swallowed gyroscopes, compasses. North, south, east, west, right, wrong, true, false. They'd swallowed it in their sense of calling. And the same person said modern people are as if they'd swallowed Gallup polls. We're always thinking, what if 51% now believe? 75% believe this, and we fall in line with other people. And that's why we have such ethical confusion today. We need people of integrity. We need people of character. And there'll be people of calling because, among other things, they live before one audience, the audience of one. And if you want people today with courage, who are going to buck the tide or stand out against things that are wrong, even if everyone else goes along with it, or won't chase empty baubles of success when they know in their heart of hearts it's empty. You have to have people who have such a sense of purpose and calling and integrity. Why? Because they live before one audience, the audience of one.
There's only one man with the skills to run this machine. That's the dyno operator. And what he does is he gets this engine to reach its maximum potential so the driver can drive as fast as he can. Well, guess what? God is your dyno operator, and he's given you skills. That's your occupation, your job. And he wants you to run that race called your job as fast as you can so that you can glorify him. And that's when we have joy, is when God is revving our engines. And maybe right now you feel like you may not be in your sweet spot. So maybe the job that you're at, God is preparing you for something down the road. But be faithful where you are, be patient where you are, and know that God has skills to help you run the race of life as fast as you can.